We have no idea why Wexner gave him all this power and money. We have no idea. You don't hand power of attorney over to some guy you've never worked with.
Especially
you met 2 years ago.
He had his own executives, people who worked for him for decades, coming to him being like, boss, who is this guy?
So recently, Tucker Carlson dove head into the subject of the truth regarding Jeffrey Epstein's wealth. How he accumulated some of it, why questions still remain about how he accumulated other parts of that wealth, and why those questions still remain relevant today. This was in the context of a conversation with Darryl Cooper, who has studied the Epstein case backwards and forwards, and I can't wait to see what they have to say about it, so let's check that out. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
I just want to linger for a second on the money.
Yeah.
So it's been reported repeatedly that there's a guy called Les Wexner, owner of the biggest house in Ohio. Who is Wexner and what is his relationship to Epstein? And before you begin, because I want people to keep this in mind as they're listening, as far as I know, and I think this is correct, Wexner, who I believe is still alive, has never been interviewed by the Department of Justice. So I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, that's correct as far as I know. So Les Wexner, he owns limited brands, L brands. So Victoria's Secret he owns, Abercrombie and Fitch, a lot of the places that you see when you go into the mall. I don't think it's the case anymore, but for a long time, he was the largest clothing manufacturer and distributor in the United States. Billionaire, incredibly wealthy guy. As you said, owns the largest and most expensive house in the state of Ohio, where he lives in Columbus. And the second largest and most expensive house in the state of Ohio was owned by Jeffrey Epstein and was directly behind Wexner's house.
What?
Yeah. So Wexner, he was introduced to Wexner through this network of people, and very, very quickly becomes. I mean, the nature of their relationship is still kind of a mystery because it's so hard to explain in any terms that you can really draw a plausible story for. Within a very short period of time, he known this Epstein guy like 2 years, right? And not because he had worked at his company for those 2 years and was so squared away, anything like that. We don't exactly know what he was doing during those 2 years, but he knew him 2 years when he signed full power of attorney over his entire estate, Les Wexner, talking billions of dollars, the largest clothing manufacturing corporation in the country, or a company in the country, to the point where this was not a limited power of attorney. Jeffrey Epstein could sign...
Wait, he gives Jeffrey Epstein power of attorney over everything?
Jeffrey Epstein could take out loans in his name. He could sign his tax returns. He had full power of attorney over the Wexner estate.
Yeah, this was ostensibly because he was the quote-unquote money manager of Les Wexner, and that's why Les Wexner showered him with millions of dollars. And there's really not a lot of evidence to conclude he was actually managing his money outside of the fact that he was essentially doing things to run these companies and actually getting himself in the process in doing so. One of the brands that Wexner owned was Victoria's Secret, and Epstein would pose as a talent scout and get around these young prospects that wanted to work for Victoria's Secret and model for them. And he started to sexually harass them and may have been involved in criminal activity regarding them. And executives from that company brought this to the attention of Wexner, who essentially brushed off his executives, some of which that had been working for him for decades, as Darryl says. But the madness doesn't stop there, and the unexplainable facets in regard to Epstein's relationship with Wexner don't stop there, because Wexner actually just gifted him a $77 million property. It was assessed that, I think, the last time that Epstein was arrested. But that was the most valuable private residence in New York, in Manhattan, where it was. And actually, his next door neighbor was Howard Lutnick, who's now in the Trump administration, but that's another story. But there are so many things about his relationship with Wexner that are just totally unable to be explained, so much so that a lot of people have theorized he was actually maybe the lover of Wexner. That has come up from time to time. There's not a lot of evidence to conclude that, but we do know that the authorities did question Epstein about that possibility, and he sort of just said no and brushed it off in questioning at one point.
Soon after that, Wexner's mother gets sick, and her spot on the Wexner Foundation board, which is how Wexner disposed of most of his money, opens up. He puts Jeffrey Epstein on there, and he basically runs the board of the foundation for about 15 years, controlling a lot of where that money went and what happened.
15 years?
Yeah. And Wexner alleged this was way later on, after everything had kind of come out. So who kind of knows? You know, everybody's kind of trying to distance themselves from Epstein at this point. But he says that Epstein stole a lot of money from him through his, you know, control over the foundation. Everything he probably did, for all I know. But you know,
I'm shocked to learn, and I'm learning this, that you're positive Jeffrey Epstein had power of attorney.
Yes.
Yeah, that information's out there anywhere. You can check that out. Yeah, he's right. That's really one of the only things we've known about Wexner and his response to this whole ordeal after kind of it came to a halt, is that he's claimed that Epstein had stolen something like, I think it was like 40 or 50 million dollars from him, but not much else is known from the horse's mouth regarding this in any official capacity. There doesn't seem to be any curiosity among people, hey, to go interview Wexner, see what he knows, why he did this, what connections he may have had in this. But we do know his background. He's one of the most benevolent supporters of pro-Zionist and pro-Israel causes in the United States, one of the richest people in the United States, you know, biggest residents in Ohio that they've talked about. But man, he stayed quiet. It's like he's in a cave. And instead of that, we're talking about this new Trump birthday card as if it's, you know, of such significance to this case. No, it's actually interview people like Les Wexner and Leon Black. That might yield more answers than we know now for sure. And guess what? Ghislaine Maxwell wants to talk too, but there doesn't seem to be much curiosity in getting her perspective on this either. So that's where we're at.
You can read that anywhere. Yeah. For 16 years, by the way, for 16 years. And so
has Wexner ever been asked, why would you give?
I don't even think forget the Department of Justice. I don't think he's given any interviews to journalists about it. Maybe he'll come on here and sit in my seat and talk to you. I kind of doubt it.
I would be polite. I'm genuinely fascinated by that detail, because that is, you know, a man who builds, like all of these characters, you know, they're unusual people. They're not average people. They're extraordinary people. By definition, you build $1 billion company, good or bad, you're not like everybody else, and you're good. You're good in business, and you're careful and judicious, and you don't hand power of attorney over to some guy you've never worked with.
Especially
you met 2 years ago.
He had his own executives, people who worked for him for decades, coming to him being like, boss, who is this guy? Like, what are you doing? Why are you giving him so much authority and power? There was a guy that Wexner had known for decades. They'd go to Ohio State football games together. They'd do dinners together. They were good friends. And he tells this story about how Jeffrey Epstein comes into the picture, and he's going to meet him for the first time. Epstein goes over to his office, and Epstein shows up like an hour late for the meeting, and he gets there, and the first thing he does when he sits down in his chair, and I mean, this is just one of those things that this isn't a faux pas. This is a message. He sits down in the chair at this important businessman. It's a good friend of his boss or whatever he was, Les Wexner. He sits down in the chair and he kicks his feet up on the guy's desk. The guy was like, okay, that's interesting. You know, this guy's not Wexner's secretary, apparently.
Quite a power move, yeah.
And so Wexner there in that meeting gets on the phone with both of the guys, and he tells his friend, you know, Jeffrey's family, treat him like family, you know. And so eventually, a little later down the line, that guy has a disagreement with Epstein, and they get into an argument about something. And from that moment on, he says he couldn't reach Wexner by phone. He got cut off immediately, completely, with no explanation. This guy had known him for decades.
Yeah, just think about that. If that doesn't highlight the madness that is this case and how many questions still linger about how he accumulated his wealth, how he got surrounded by such powerful people, you know, from the 80s onward, I don't know what does. There's so many angles to this that should have been more explored than they ever have been. And, you know, the feds haven't exactly been forthcoming as to why they haven't been. You know, we're talking about this client list, which may or may not exist. I do think the feds have information regarding the clients. We certainly know the victims pointed out a lot of the clients, whether, you know, the accused. There were many people among the accused, including Clinton and Bill Richardson and Prince Andrew and all sorts of other individuals that, you know, we haven't really taken a long look at. And it's Epstein's surroundings in these circumstances with Wexner, one of the most, you know, wealthy people in the world, that still just can't be explained. It just doesn't make any sense that this guy that he met a few years prior would essentially exercise full authority over his companies, over the people that he had surrounded himself with in the decades prior. And we may never get any answers about Les Wexner, but we know, you know, We know the basics.
because he had a tiff with Jeffrey Epstein. And so this guy clearly had either some kind of a powerful hold over Wexner for one reason or another.
Well, by definition, we can say that.
Or they were working together in some other way. So Wexner's another one of these interesting cats, right? Like where his mentor was a real estate guy mainly, but he did a lot of things named Max Fisher. And I think he was originally from Indiana, Max Fisher, but lived in Ohio, I believe. But anyway, either way, he was Wexner's mentor for a while. Not his mentor like when he was just getting started. Wexner's already rich by this point. It's not about that. Fisher's his big main thing was philanthropic contributions in management for Jewish and Zionist and State of Israel related causes, right? And so when you look at like what the Wexner Foundation did, for example, they would give a little bit of money to Ohio State University here and there, and like a few other things locally there in Columbus and around the state of Ohio. But the vast, vast, vast majority of it went to Zionist organizations, Jewish organizations, things like that.
That's right. I mean, Wexner made a name for himself by being like the biggest benefactor, the biggest donor to pro-Israel causes. Darryl's right about that. And by the way, all this power was given to Epstein under the auspices that he was the money manager of Wexner. It's not even clear that Epstein had that many clients in terms of his money management business, by the way. He claimed to only be willing to accept clients with $1 billion of assets that Epstein could invest for that person. And we're not even talking about you have to be a billionaire only. You have to have $1 billion worth of assets that he will invest for you. He had turned people down for falling short of that. The only people he seemed to manage money for were Adnan Khashoggi and Les Wexner for the most part. He did taxes for Leon Black. Leon Black's the guy that gave him, again, inexplicably, about $150 million just to do his taxes and save money for him in doing his taxes. So the whole thing just doesn't make sense. There's too many lingering questions, and I think there's too many red herrings in this case. And if you go to some of, Epstein's upbringing and how he rose to power and prominence in these years in Ohio, I think we might be given more answers than we have now.
Fine. Fisher's the guy that sort of did what Yitzhak Shamir did with Robert Maxwell, but for Les Wexner. You go to him and you say, you've got an obligation here to the Jewish state. You're a Jewish billionaire. You're a big, important person in the most powerful country in the world. Like, you have an obligation to your people. And again, it's a powerful call. And so it really came to, in a lot of ways, define Wexner's life after that. And so in the 1990s, this was in the newspapers and stuff during the Clinton administration. Really, really interesting. Les Wexner and Edgar Bronfman, which, if that name sounds familiar, it's because I mentioned.
Sorry, I want to just pause. I was just handed this.
We got breaking news.
To some extent, this is from the President of the United States, released on Truth Social just now. Based on the ridiculous amount of publicity, I'm quoting, given to Jeffrey Epstein, I have asked Attorney General Pam Bondi to produce any and all pertinent grand jury testimony subject to court approval. The scam, all caps, perpetrated by Democrats, comma, should end, comma, right now, exclamation point.
All right, shut the cameras off, guys. We're done here.
Yeah. Well, first of all, pertinent grand jury testimony subject to what the court wants to release. I don't think this is going to contain the relevant details people were asking for. Things related to the warrant searches, the information that Epstein gave the FBI as an informant, which we know was the result partially of his plea deal, the sweetheart deal he got from Acosta. Part of that was, I am going to be forthcoming about what I know to the FBI. Nothing's come of that. People don't seem curious about asking that. But also he continues to perpetrate the lie that this is a Democratic hoax. No. If this was a Democratic hoax, not only would they have released this stuff under Biden when, the deep state was controlled by Biden's men in the deep state, but also it doesn't make sense in the first place, given that the Republicans are the ones that started to drum this up. The Democrats chose Russiagate as their weapon against Trump. They chose, the Hunter Biden laptop, how that was a lie. against Trump. Those were their weapons of choice. They could have hit Trump over the head with Epstein and the Epstein case, the Epstein story, especially given his close personal associations with Epstein in the 90s and the early 2000s, but they chose not to do it. You barely heard a peep from them on this. This was a right-wing populist effort to say, hey, there was a cover-up going on here and an apparent blackmail arrangement and possible connections to foreign intelligence, including maybe Mossad. And that's what's being covered up. It wasn't a democratic thing. So, we'll have to see what comes from this, but that the whole message is just absurd. We're not going to get answers here. It's a bipartisan cover-up.
Well, I still think, okay, that's pretty good. I have no idea where this leads, if anywhere. I certainly hope it leads to greater disclosure. That's good for everyone, including the president. And it's good for everyone. Disclosure is good. But it doesn't change, in my opinion, the need for anyone who's interested in the story to know what the story actually is. So I hope you will continue.
Yeah. So in the 1990s, Wexner and Edgar Bronfman, who I mentioned earlier, one of the heirs to the Seagram's liquor fortune, who was one of Jeffrey Epstein's clients when he was working at Bear Stearns, those two guys founded a group called the Study Group, but it's more commonly known as the Mega Group. That came out in the papers a little bit in the late 1990s. Not a lot was written about it. It was a group of, at first, about 20, but then later it expanded Jewish billionaires in the United States and Canada who would meet at least twice a year to get together and just coordinate how they were distributing their philanthropic money, what their focuses were for that year, just making sure they were all acting in concert to help serve the interests of Israel in their respective countries. And they would finance scholars and other professionals to write up papers and studies and analyses for the Israeli government, for Israeli intelligence, for example. And they were very plugged into that. And very, very, very connected to the Israeli government and specifically Israeli intelligence through the work that they would do for the Israelis. And again, just one more sort of connection there to the intelligence world among people who were very, very, very close to Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah, absolutely. And to make two connections from Epstein's past, both Wexner and Bronfman, who was a client of him at Bear Stearns, the heir to the Seagram's fortune. This is just another layer of questions here, and Epstein's constant propensity to somehow, coincidentally, right, surround himself with figures from the intelligence community, basically from the start of his professional life, because Donald Barr hired him to work at the Dalton School, and Donald Barr was an OSS member. So, I'm not saying that Donald Barr had any implications and, illicit activities and connections to Epstein when Epstein was a math teacher. Actually, it doesn't seem to be that way. But through his entire lifetime, he surrounded himself with shady figures from the underworld and shady figures from intelligence services and those doing the bidding of intelligence services, whether it be Robert Maxwell or Ehud Barak or Adnan Khashoggi or Douglas Leese. You name it, he was surrounded by them this entire time.
Now, when you watch the Netflix documentary or anything about Jeffrey Epstein, one of the things that really does stick out to you is this guy, okay, there's rich and then there's rich. And Jeffrey Epstein was rich. I mean, apparently, right? This is a guy who...
He certainly lived like it.
He had the second largest... I mean, when you see the pictures of this place he lived in Ohio, the pictures of this ranch he lived on in New Mexico, he had a $70 million house in the largest private residence, I believe, in New York City, or in Manhattan.
How did he buy that house?
Les Wexner gave it to him.
Lex Wexner gave him a $70 million house?
Yeah, I don't think it was worth $70 million at the time, but when he got arrested, it was, yeah.
Yeah, he gave him that property, and actually that's where he hosted some of the most prominent people he was connected with, even after he was convicted of the child molestation charges in Florida the first time under that plea deal in 2008. After that, he had people like Bill Clinton over, and Ehud Barak visited him 30 times and lived there. This is the chief of Mossad, former chief of Mossad, and former Israeli prime minister. So again, This is a theme that runs the wavelength through his life. He surrounds himself with figures from the intelligence community. That's why we're asking questions. That's why we're not conspiracy theorists. We're just noting the facts and pointing out plausible scenarios based on the facts. And the most plausible scenario, I think, is he worked on behalf of Mossad. Not necessarily a Mossad employee with a badge, but as a Mossad asset. Very, very, very probable.
I gave it to him.
Worth more now.
Probably. Yeah.
I mean, and no one's ever asked Les Wexner, why did you sign over power of attorney over your whole life and give, among other things, a $70 million property, the biggest private residence in Manhattan, to Jeffrey Epstein? No one.
I mean, I don't think he's given anybody the opportunity. You know, he had that big island in, you know, everybody's seen the picture of the temple on the island, but that's just one little part of it. I mean, it's a much, I think it was 60, 80 acre island, something like that. Big, beautiful mansion, several outbuildings, that crazy temple. He had a fleet of airplanes, and not just a Learjet or something like that. He had a customized 727. So basically his own Air Force One he was flying around in, you know. He had a mansion in Paris. He actually owned a second U.S. Virgin Island down there as well. I mean, so this is a dude who is, Elon Musk doesn't live this way. He probably could, but he doesn't.
Not
you
even
know
close.
What I mean? So
Not
like,
even close. No, Elon sleeps on people's couches.
Right. And so
actually,
if you take the official story, which is that he was a money manager of some kind, the only client that we know of was Les Wexner, but what he exactly even did for Wexner, nobody's really able to describe. And
Yeah, that's the truth. He basically made choices on behalf of Wexner concerning his business endeavors, causing questions among the other executives. That's what he did. There's not really any evidence that he actually managed money, even though that's what he said his business was started for. It was probably a front. So that's where we're at.
So the official story is he's a money manager.
right.
Is there any, so it's hard to manage money in a country whose financial systems are as regulated as ours are anonymously. So if you're actually managing money, certainly if you're conducting trades, there's a record. And in some capacities, you have to register.
Yeah.
Is there any documentary evidence that Jeffrey Epstein was in any recognizable sense a money manager?
Not only is there no documentary evidence, you know, people who have to understand how, you know, the regulatory environment is one reason that it's really hard to do any of this kind of thing on that scale under the radar, but also just on a personal network level, like in Wall Street and places like that. Like if you're a guy, so Jeffrey Epstein back in the 1980s, he claims, the claim was, at the time even, not just now, it's not something he came up with later, that he was a money manager who only took accounts of $1 billion or more. So you didn't just have to be a billionaire, you had to have $1 billion to invest with him. Right?
Yeah, I was just saying that.
A guy who knew him back then thought he would do Epstein a solid, and he brought him a client who had $600 million he wanted to invest with Epstein. This is 1980s money. It's like $2 billion today, like inflation adjusted, right? You show up with that kind of money to Goldman Sachs, and the CEO is going to meet you at the front door and take you up his private elevator.
100%.
And the company's vice presidents are going to give you a presentation about all the people that are going to be dedicated
and a
only
foot
to your
massage,
account, all that kind of
course,
stuff.
yes.
Like the biggest investment banks in the world are going to audition for you. You don't audition for them. You know what I mean? Like if you have that kind of money. Epstein blew the guy off. He said, "Oh no, it's too small. I don't deal with that kind of pocket change. You know, 600 million today, $2 billion." And so you say, well, that's obviously ridiculous. Obviously, there is no fund manager in the world that would do that. And so why would he do that?
More inconsistencies with the story. It's clear that he had ties to some power network, maybe intelligence, maybe not, but he certainly wasn't a money manager. That was the myth the whole time. He did do money movement at Bear Stearns, specializing in tax mitigation strategies, moving money offshores, and he did get in bed with arms traffickers like Adnan Khashoggi and Douglas Lease, but he certainly wasn't a money manager. And, you know, it's such an absurdity to say he was. There's no records of this ever happening, which makes it even more alarming and mysterious as to how he accumulated so much power and wealth and prestige from Les Wexner.
And I think when you look at the whole record, the answer is obvious. He wasn't a money manager. You know,
He
people
didn't actually invest people's money.
Yeah, people think like a hedge fund is like a dude sitting at his at his desktop computer, like on E-Trade or something. Hedge funds have teams of analysts and mathematicians, and all.
Yeah.
It's a whole big business, you know, and like people need to understand that. So nobody knows anybody who's ever worked for Epstein in this capacity. Nobody's ever, I mean, look, when you're operating at that level, if he was who he says he was, moving that kind of money around, you know, you don't go buy shares in Microsoft, you know, you take a position in the company, you know, these are things that are done through large institutions, and, you know, you have to have institutional support so that they can gather up enough shares for you to purchase, and then structure the purchases in a way that it doesn't just suck all the liquidity out of the market and you know, drive the market crazy on the stock price for a little while. This is a complex operation. There's a lot of people involved. Nobody has heard of anybody who's who's ever done any kind
and
of
there's
a deal
no
with
record
Epstein.
of
No
anything.
nothing.
Right.
No nothing.
There's no paper trail behind this. It's just, it doesn't make sense, and we've never been given answers for it, especially by the government, the entity that was in charge of both investigations, both in 2006 to 2008 and in 2008 onward until his death in 2019. So, you know, we're not getting answers. Trump's not giving us them either, even after talking about how, you know, they'd be transparent about it. How Bongino and Kash Patel and Pam Bondi talked about, hey, divulging the files. Alina Habba, Trump's lawyer, was out there saying, hey, you're going to be shocked by the names that we produce on this thing. Yeah, after all that, we're not even given answers about the most basic things, including the farce that Epstein was a money manager. He wasn't.
Investing money, trading stocks, nothing.
Which is just impossible. I mean, it's flat out impossible that he was doing what the official story says he was doing, and there's just no trace of it. It's not possible.
So once again, where'd the money come from?
Well,
so clearly some of it came from Les Wexner. I'm summarizing what I think you've said. We have no idea why Wexner gave him all this power and money. We have no idea.
We don't have hard evidence on it. You know, some people have suggested blackmail because of the things that have come out about Epstein, but we don't have anything like that. There are people who were in the Wexner circle back in those days when Epstein was around, and they've claimed that Epstein was known kind of around the office as the boyfriend, but that's just an allegation. Nobody has any hard information on that. And
Yeah, that's been a rumor that's been around for a while. And again, Epstein denied that in questioning by the authorities. They actually asked him about that because I guess that would be a plausible reason to maybe explain why this gigantic billionaire is shoveling money into his coffers. Even then, it doesn't really make that much sense. But blackmail is another possibility too.
Both of the guys, Epstein was asked about it under oath, and Wexner, they all obviously deny that. So it's not an accusation or anything, but it's just trying to understand something that otherwise is like really inexplicable, right?
So what were there other, because Epstein's annual operating budget had to be like, it's hard to calculate, but like not that hard. Just maintaining aircraft like that is just beyond.
Big yacht he had,
beyond. Who are the other rich people he got money from? Do we know?
Well, so there was a story that actually just came out in the last few days that I have not had an opportunity to really dig down deep in. I should go check Mike Benz's Twitter feed. He's probably done this or he will soon. But where there are records apparently of $1.5 billion that were transferred to and from Epstein, apparently involving people whose names we've all heard before.
Yeah, actually, Ron Wyden is trying to push this in U.S. Congress right now. He is aware of this story and has brought it to the Congress on the floor to try to not only raise awareness for it, but also garner support amongst other representatives and senators to vote to disclose that. This is $1.5 billion in wire transfers from Jeffrey Epstein to prominent people. And I don't think they're going to give us this information either or tell us what it was all about. But that is something some people are fighting for. You're not hearing it in the mainstream news. Right now, the mainstream news is taken over by red herrings regarding this. It didn't start as red herrings. It started as legitimate questions about a cover-up. And now it's gone to this Epstein birthday card that Trump may or may not have signed and left a message for. I think that's a total distraction. The real answers are still what the American people deserve. How did he get his wealth? Who worked for him, who he was trafficking underage minors to, who was involved in this sex trafficking ring, and what connections he had to intelligence services, whether foreign or domestic. Those are the important questions. Don't get distracted.
It's not public. And so I haven't dug deeply into that and exactly what's going on with it. So maybe there's one document there that we can, that's going to tell us something. But even that doesn't explain how. I mean, he's living the lifestyle of a guy who personally has billions and billions of dollars.
But it doesn't explain motive. It doesn't explain why Wexner would give him all of this at the very young age with no relevant experience as a tax advisor, as an investor.
Yeah, absolutely. No explanation really covers for what we do know about Epstein. It's why there's so many lingering questions. You can't say it enough. I mean, so many things around this saga are mysterious, and getting to the bottom of it might be a tough job because there are so many crazy things and so many avenues of Epstein's life. So look, in addition to what they talked about here, Epstein made about $200,000 from Bear Stearns, it looks like, from what we know. That's not a lot now, but back then, adjusted for inflation, that was probably somewhere in the neighborhood of, I don't know, $500,000, $600,000 now. He received, dozens of millions from Les Wexner. It's not exactly clear how much, but also immaculate properties in Ohio and Manhattan. The Manhattan resident, it was valued at $77 million at the time in which he was arrested. He also got paid $150 million about by Leon Black. He's another sexual offender. He ran Apollo Global, I believe, was the company. It was an investment bank, and he was an art connoisseur. He ran one of the biggest and most expensive art museums in the country. He had very many famous art pieces of artwork, including the Scream, by the way, like one of the most prominent art pieces ever that he bought for about $119 million or something like that. And he has basically not been exhaustively interviewed either, it doesn't seem like. There were some sexual allegations toward him by people connected with Epstein that said, hey, he was one of the clients that we were trafficked to. But some of those lawsuits got dropped. So look, we don't know enough about how Epstein accumulated his wealth. I know some people don't think that's an interesting conversation or relevant or germane conversation, but I think it is, because that might contain the clues to who Epstein really was and who he was actually working for. These wire transfers, $1.5 billion worth, that might yield some answers. It might yield some answers to see, if there were any transactions with Ehud Barak or people related to Israeli intelligence, Robert Maxwell, Adnan Khashoggi. He surrounded himself with these people for his entire life. And still you don't hear about this side of the story. But this is the side the dissidents care about. Follow the money, seek the truth. That's what Ian Carroll always says. He's a guy that follows this too. And I think that's the right approach. So I'm really thankful to Darryl and Tucker for having this conversation. There's many aspects of the Epstein case that I've talked about on my channel and other people are talking about, but Epstein's wealth is perhaps one of the most interesting. And they're right. He really did live a lavish lifestyle, the lifestyle of a billionaire that even billionaires don't live. They gave the example of Elon Musk, but a lot of people don't live this playboy, lavish lifestyle, throwing parties and, violating women in the process. This just was kind of a unique character in so many ways, and we don't have answers. Every aspect of his life is something of a mystery, and I don't think Trump's going to deliver on that mystery, I hate to say. After all the rhetoric, after all the campaigning, all the people within the Trump administration and activists that, were talking about this and demanded more answers, and there is more material, but I don't think we're going to get it. And I think because too many people are implicated in this and it spans too many political lines, the left-right dichotomy, whether it's Democrat or Republican, Epstein surrounded himself with both parties. Prominent people in both parties, that's the truth. But I do want to hear from you. Let me know in the comments below. How do you think Epstein acquired much of his wealth outside of what is known? And do you think Epstein's wealth is an important subject in the context of the entire Epstein saga? Let me know down below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Tucker too. Great interview. He has great guests. And please consider becoming a YouTube member. If you click the join button below, you can support the channel. And in return, I'm going to give you access to all my videos before they go live to the public on YouTube. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.